Upasana asked me to give another talk, and I didn't have a title, so that's why it's a secret talk on there. But I figured out a title last night, so that's it. Yeah. All right, we'll just start here. So, as some of you may or may not know, one of the things that sort of has been a theme of my my Perl work has been related to object systems. So I created Moose and other things like that. So I'll give you a quick history of that so you can sort of hopefully see. And what I'm going to actually talk about is my latest version / prototype of an attempt to put a new object system into the Perl 5 core. And what I'd actually like to do is get feedback from people, because one of the goals of this is to make it simple to understand, not just from a syntax level, but also for you to be able to understand what's actually happening under the hood. So I'm going to try and go through that here. Please ask me any questions. We have other speakers after me, so we can't talk forever, but I'm certainly going to be around after that. So really, feedback from this talk is what I'm hoping to get from you guys and gals. So it actually all started with Pugs, which was a project to experimentally write Perl 6 in Haskell, and I got involved in it and got involved in the object system there. And what that basically did was make me really wish that I had it in Perl 5, which is exactly the impetus behind Moose. One of the things people don't necessarily know about Moose is that Moose was actually, so Perl 5 core, there was a module called class mop. That was my first successful mop that I created. There was maybe 10 or 15 prototypes before that, all of which were thrown away at various stages. The thing is that Moose eventually just grew and got bigger. Upasana actually is one of the people who made it really, really big, with all the exception objects. But it got really bigger, and class mop became less and less important, and it got actually swallowed up into the Moose core itself. So when I think back of Moose and things like that, as much as the mop felt like it was successful at first, it ultimately wasn't, because it basically didn't. Nobody actually used it outside of Moose. So in about 2011, I was talking with Jesse Vincent, who was the Pumpkin at the time, and he had a vision that he was calling Perl 5.16 and beyond. And one of the things that he was talking about a number of different features that he was hoping to bring into the Perl 5 core, some crazier than others, this and that, and I saw an opening. And so I said to him, hey, could we talk about possibly adding more to the object system in Perl core? Would that work for you? He said, sure, come up with a proposal and an idea and get it through P5P and then implement it and then test it and then get it released and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which of course, it's just a simple matter of doing that. So I started on this project. The way I sort of tried to put it together was I wanted to have my nice, beautiful mop, and I drew a line in blood to protect it from, this is a sort of sacred line of blood that protected it from the unclean Perl core, or that's how I was viewing it at the time. This project didn't work very well. Turns out it's really hard to do that. So I got a little discouraged after a little while. And then I actually started on another project. This was after a YAPC that I went to, in which I actually saw a talk by Peter Martini, who talked about trying to get the subroutine signatures into core, which we currently have now in 5.22 is when it's going to be for sale. I've been using them for a while. They're still experimental, but they work really well. Even though Peter didn't do the final implementation, he was the one who kept the feature alive and kept the idea alive for a very, very long time. And his talk actually talked about navigating the core and navigating P5P and things like that, so it inspired me to try again. So I sort of started with a similar idea. Okay, I'll try and keep it separated, but I wanted to sort of make sure that they understood one another. So I was trying to keep some of the core concepts and some of the concepts that are in the core of Perl 5. I was trying to make sure to make use of this and not try and build something special that was new and shiny and had line and blood so it would be protected. I allowed a certain intermingling. Of course, the reality is that it got a little crazy. Things missed the mark. Things went one way entirely. Things looped back upon themselves. It was a lot trickier than I thought. And of course, XS started rearing its ugly head at the core. How many of you have programmed in XS? Wow. We should start a support group.
There's quite a few from the P5P club. So
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So naturally, so that project actually, it worked well as a prototype, but as an implementation was not really there. It was built over time too much, or it was sort of built incrementally rather than designed. And so in particular was the XS that got us. And so I tried to actually stop and write it in XS, and I'm not a C programmer. So it basically made a giant mess. It's segfaulted a little bit. Like my transitions, I spent a lot of time on the transition. It broke everything, okay? You can check it out. I think it compiles still, but it's on GitHub. But I realized that XS really wasn't my thing, and then I needed to have some sort of a marriage between the two, which led to the latest version. So this project is the one that I'm actually the most happy about, and I'm being very, very slow and deliberate about the way I build it. In fact, anytime I run into something where I can't figure it out, I put the project aside and I let it sort of percolate in my head. And I'm really, really striving for two things. One is as simple as possible, and two, to reuse the maximum amount, or to get the maximum amount of reuse out of the Perl core. So instead of just trying to integrate with the Perl core or stay separated from the Perl core, instead I'm actually actively diving into the Perl core, looking for elements that exist inside there that I can turn into the features that I need. And it's actually surprisingly a lot of stuff in the Perl core that's either used or unused or not used in the right way or used in a different way or whatever, but a lot of these things can actually be repurposed. So with that, we're going to jump over to here. Okay, so now, and that's not going to work. Hold on a second. I need to change my slides so it's mirroring display. Displays. Movement. Mirror. Okay. Close that. So, we'll see how successful this is. So let's start first. That's where I can sit. Okay. So this right here. Zoom on in. So this is the proposed end syntax. Those of you familiar with Perl 6 might notice that it looks a whole hell of a lot like. Wait, where's that? No, it keeps coming around. This is why you use presentation tools. Where is it? There we go. Yeah, yay. So you'll notice that that looks a lot like that. So a lot of what I'm actually trying to do, and a lot of, as I try to illustrate with the history there, is actually to get Perl 6, like object orientation, into Perl 5. And I have two reasons for this. One, as much as I find Perl 5 object orientation nice and useful, it can be difficult to work with and difficult to work with on scale and things like that. And also too, if Perl 6 and Perl 5 are going to live together as sister languages or whatever we end up doing, a level of interoperability would be nice on an object level as well as, just on a scale. Be able to read a Perl 5 scalar from Perl 6 and vice versa. But being able to have objects that you can actually inherit from one another and can go back and forth, I think is going to be important for both the success of Perl 6 and the two of them working together as they go. So it's very purposefully meant to be like that. So we have a couple of things here. And actually there's a list, if you look in the original Apocalypse 12, which describes the new object system for Perl 6, there's a list of things that are wrong with Perl 5.0. I don't actually agree with everything in there, but he does make, Larry and the other authors, make a number of good points. One is that it'd be nice to have a distinction between packages and classes. Right now we write package when we really mean class. It'd be nice to be able, for the Perl compiler or the Perl runtime, to understand about the state of an object. Right now you can't. Hashrefs are just, or globrefs, or whatever you choose to use as your instance type, is completely opaque to the compiler and to the runtime systems. You have to basically guess. So being able to manage those is one thing, being able to have classes, the distinction between subs and methods, all these things are sort of nice to haves. We've all lived for many, many years without them, so we know that it's possible. I mean, Booking is making billions of euros just using old Perl 5, and plenty of other companies are too. But something like this would just, it makes code easier to read, makes code easier to maintain, etc., etc. So this is the end game. This is most likely not going to be out in the first proposal because of, well, one thing in particular, this. Everybody shakes their head at this. This is a twiggle. There's a very good reason why we actually introduced them into the P5 mop, because if you had a parameter named X, then you'd have to worry about name clashes. Anybody who's done enough Java programming will know that every once in a while they have to reach in anger for this dot in order to resolve those name conflicts. There wasn't an easy solution like that in Perl, so we opted for the twiggles. And the reality is, with a good syntax highlighter, they really do help to differentiate from your local variables and from that. And so they're really helpful, a little ugly, a little difficult to get used to, but you get used to it over time. But other than that, as you can see, still calling super the same way, we're assigning this here. I mean, nothing is really that crazy and that out there, we just have some syntax. That syntax is pretty much the same. Let's see if we can get these both on the screen at the same time. Yeah. So my current prototype does not actually implement the syntax stuff. Mostly, again, that whole excess, me causing everything is segfault. There's a lot of excess that needs to be written for this, and I just haven't gotten enough time and drunk enough, I guess, to do it. Right now I currently have a Moose-style reference implementation of how you might do an object system. So what I want to sort of illustrate here, I want to take you back. So this is our end game that we're really looking for, and I want to take you back through the various layers so that you can see sort of how all this could get built up. And then again, I'd like feedback to see, does this make sense? At what stage did I lose you on? Are you asking more questions, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see a pretty clear a match between this. We've got state here, we've got default values here, we've got a callback to provide default subs here. Methods are still subs. We export the experimental signature stuff, so we get that in there. This is just plain old Perl 5 that you can do. All these things are pretty straightforward. We use the Moose syntax for declaring inheritance relationships, stuff like that. If you're familiar with Moose at all, Moose just exported keywords that you would then call. They're just plain old Perl functions. There was never anything fancy about the way Moose did syntax, and consequently, same thing here. The only tricky part is we do exert more control over the timing of when these are going to happen, which I can illustrate with this one. Okay. So what you saw there was first a syntax layer that gets transferred or transformed. Then another one, a more Perlish syntax layer, the Moose style one. And now we're just looking at the raw mop code. So the mop, how many of you know what a mop is? Can you back out and explain that? A mop is an API to your classes, methods, attributes, meaning state in your object, and instances. So it's an API that you use to access sort of the internals of what your compiler or your runtime might do in putting all this stuff together. Typically, it's also written in object-oriented code, which means it's usually sometimes meta-circular, meaning that you can implement the mop in itself, and you can extend the mop in itself. So that's something that we took care to do in Moose, and we're taking care to do here as well. But anyway, if you look at this code, it should look a very long-winded version, but it's basically the same thing as what we had before. We create a class, we set a superclass. Those other ones had an implicit inheritance from a base object. So in Java, your capital O object. There is no equivalent in Perl. Universal is kind of an equivalent, but not really. But we provide a mop object which has a constructor, destructor, and a few other methods I don't remember exactly. But basically the idea is it provides you a default constructor and a default destructor. And what it does with the constructor is just very simple. It looks at all those attributes and it makes sure to construct you an instance accordingly. So anyway, we have inheritance here. Here we're adding attributes. Again, this should look very familiar before. We had the name before, followed by default, and then the callback. Here we're passing them in as attributes there. Creating a method does the same thing. Accessing instance slots. One of the things, if you want Perl 5 to really take it and run with it and go really fast, you need to let go of control over an instance. So we can, Perl 5 could create a C-level instance that's opaque to you on the Perl side, but you'd be able to access through functions like this or something like that. Or you just use hash refs. The Perl 5 mop does not, it has an opinion, but it doesn't force it, and it gives you the option to override it. But so just for the sake of argument here, we have this utility function that will introspect what's in self. We'll figure out how to get to that slot, and then we'll assign that value to it. And we have other things: set at slot, get at slot, has at slot. These are basically any slot there. So we have that all there. Finalizer, that's something we didn't see before. Okay, a finalizer, when a class is done, it'd be nice for the compiler to know, all right, you're done defining this class. It is now closed. I can do things to it because you're not going to change it anymore. So in Moose, there's a thing called make immutable, which will go back and will recompile your constructor calls, your destructor calls into optimized versions of those subroutines. We don't actually do that in the mop, but we make sure that we have the ability to do that. So a finalizer gets called at the end of the compilation unit, which is the unit check down here that unit check here. Unit check is similar to begin and check in init in Perl, but it fires at the end of the compilation unit, meaning either the compilation of your main program or the compilation of an eval or I think use statement might be triggered. But the point is that at that point everything's compiled, but the runtime has not begun. The main loop hasn't been entered, but everything has been compiled. So at that point, we run all the finalizers, but we're able to register them at this point. And you'll notice that this is all inside of a begin block, so we are doing this all compile time. And this is exactly, in theory, the code that's being run for those last two examples. So you can see we're basically starting to expand it out. This is a little weird, but finding the super method. Super is actually compile time generated. So when you write super : in your Perl 5 code, the package that subroutine was compiled in is what the super is in relation to. So this again here tries to sort of mimic that same idea. Although we did use super in the past one. But anyway, the point is, yeah, that. So is this making sense at all? Are you seeing sort of the correlation between the different stages here? Anybody have any questions? Anybody scratching their head going, what the fuck is he talking about? No? Not yet? Okay. Soon you will. Okay, so we've gone from a full-on syntax, custom syntax layer, down to a more Perlish DSL style syntax layer, to now we've thrown away syntax and we're actually writing it by hand. And then this is actually the part that I want the most feedback on. So ultimately, this is what I wanted to compile down into. Part of why I think some of the other prototypes failed was because I was actually not embracing what's there and embracing the mechanisms that exist on a much deeper level. Probably because I didn't really understand them and I didn't know them until I spent some time with the Perl 5 core. I didn't know what I was getting into, but as I spent more and more time, I see all the ways that the existing OO works, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to hook into more of that. So obviously, the ISA, we've all written this line. So we've got that. It occurred to me that attributes could be stored in a hash at compile time. You get a couple things out of this. First, you're telling the slots that you want to have, and then you're defining a callback to generate default instances. One of the nice things that Perl does is actually, when this subroutine is compiled, it makes a note in the underlying C structure of what package it has been compiled in. Even though it's an anonymous subroutine, it will still respond to the fact that it has a stash name, which is the point stash, which allows you to differentiate between an attribute created here in this class versus an attribute created in that class. You can begin then to take advantage of things like the way Perl method caching works, which is to essentially, when you call a method that is not in your local class, and it has to reach out to a superclass, it then pulls that method back in and stuffs it into the stash of your local class. It's just, it's done in such a way that Perl knows that if the cache is invalidated, it can throw it out. But otherwise it's there, so it creates a quicker jump to actually get to the code. You can do the same thing by, if I were to, so once these classes are closed, there's nothing stopping me from point3d from grabbing these two hash entries and stuffing them into its local hash, because we can always look at the subroutines and say, that's not yours, you don't own that. So if cache gets invalidated, we throw it out, but we keep it local. So again, this is where learning more about what's inside the Perl core begins to start to make more sense. What's not shown in here is roles. So role composition is just @does, @uppercase does. It's the exact same thing. You do have to tell roles to compile or to compose together, which gets done in the unit check, which gets done because you register a finalizer to do it. So you begin to pull all these pieces together. I used to actually store this way, but I have a different way of storing it. I'm not entirely sure if I want to do it this way, but the point being that it's easy to just basically say it is closed. Finalizers, you would have a array finalizer, and you just push onto it, and you'll be able to add stuff on there. And as long as you're still doing it within the begin block, it'll be registered to fire the unit check, etc. But one of the goals here is that if you want to use my fancy, if you want to use this, you can. If you don't want to use that, or for some reason you think syntactic extensions are dangerous or whatever, you could use that, because that's just a couple Perl subroutines that you call at various times, and they construct the thing in the background. Or if you don't like my syntactic choices at all, you can write this by hand, or you can write your own syntax layer, both as a keyword syntax or as a DSL style, to call these same things underneath. And if all else fails, and I can't imagine who would do this other than maybe Abigail, you write exactly what the compiler would eventually output. See, you were paying attention. I noticed you were paying attention. No, so the idea here is that if you don't want to use my mop, you don't want to use any of my abstraction layers, but you want to take advantages of some of the features like role composition or other stuff like that, you can write it here. So if you don't like my mop API, you can just write it by hand, you can have something generate this, you can do whatever it is you want with that, but it all comes back down to very, very straightforward storage in your base Perl types, so your stash, stuff like that. Okay, pause. Everybody still with me? Anybody have any questions? Anybody starting to think, he's kind of crazy? No?
Start thinking that?
Okay. Anybody thinking he's crazier than when he first walked in the door? Other than you? No, do you have a question? Sorry? No, you're just trolling. Okay, so that's good. That's good. I feel good about this. Either you're all lying to me, or this is really working out well. So I have a bonus slide. This. One of the things about all the stuff that I've shown you in the past is that you have to go through the Perl end of it, which means it's only as fast as my implementation. Now that's a problem, because there's a lot of XS authors and a lot of extensions which could really benefit from some serious speed. And Perl OO, still to this day right now, doesn't actually give you an easy way to do that. If you've ever called this is a really, really simple method call. if I was passing, so some of you are in the P5 club, okay, so please syntax check this, number one, because I'm probably lying in here a few times. But calling a method from the XS layer can get really complicated. This is very simple. I'm calling it in void context, and I'm only passing one argument to it. And I don't really care about freeing temps or setting temps because I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to need them. And also it made it fit on the slide better. But we have enter and leave. So all this boilerplate is to just call a method in Perl 5. So
You're forgetting the SP again.
the what?
SP again.
But I don't think I need that. Do I need that? I thought that's just if you're calling it in a loop.
You need that after the call.
Okay.
Otherwise, the accessor term might use the wrong context effect.
Okay. So it's even worse than this. is what they're saying.
This is
so,
the sort of thing that will crash your code occasionally.
Occasionally. Okay, so
Very occasionally.
So it's good 50% of the time. So anyway, the idea is I want to have the ability to do a couple things. So just to go from sort of top to bottom on here, and again, my C is not very good. I already told you I segfault more than I compile. And my excess, this is partially from memory, and then I'm making up some stuff at the bottom. But here's a very simple, that callback we had to just create the default values. That's what that is. This is the clear method. We're calling, so I've created some Perl level data structures. We have an OV, which is an opaque value. We have an MPV, which is a meta package value. We have an MAV, which is a meta attribute value. And we have an MMV, which is a meta method value. you like the names? Yeah. I was trying to...
It took a very bad naming convention
and I went further with it. That was my goal.
But if you specify the MMV, like it is yours, it's YMMV.
YMMV, yeah, YMMV. So we got some slot storage up there. We're returning on def. We're calling the super method here. So these are the two methods. They're implemented in C. Then as we go down here, we pull out, we create a meta package value for the mop object, because we're going to want to inherit from it eventually. We get one for a point, and because strings would get lonely if they don't have their length with them in the C language, so we always have to pass in the length. We're pushing the superclass on. This is that code up there at the top that did the default initializers. Here we basically create a new CV object, which is a code value. This is not my naming convention, this is Perl's naming convention. We tell it it's an XS sub, and then we tell it which XS sub is the implementation on there. And then we do it again for the other attribute, but then we pass these both in, add attribute point, and then we tell it the X attribute, because we already know the name, we know that, so we kind of just extract those bits here. The clear method. We make a new CV, we wrap it around a method value, and then we basically set the XS sub in there. We could tell it to do a Perl sub or whatever we want, but that's obviously to get the XS sub in there. So now we've not only created all of our classes without even bothering with Perl syntax. We're creating them at a C level, but we're also, our methods are implemented in C. So we still have Perl's method call overhead, but the methods that are being called are going to be faster and quicker. And we've assembled this all using the mop in a way that means you can also interact cleanly with objects that were created in the mop in the Perl land version of it, because they're all going to have the exact same data structures when it all comes down to it. And then that says mark as closed. So we close it down to the bottom. Yeah, right there. We do that there. So the idea here again is, you have various Perl projects like the PDL folks, the Perl data language, the SDL team. Those who are really working with a lot of objects in C land and need to have those objects be able to work within Perl context, and they build a lot of bridges to get to this. So one of the, and I don't think anybody does it the same way. I've talked to at least a couple of people on those different projects for various reasons, and most of the time they all have wildly different ideas, and even within the projects, wildly different ideas about how to do that. So the goal is, hopefully here, like I said, I need more help from actual C programmers to pull this one off. But the goal here is to be able to also create all your objects in C land and then have them work just fine in Perl land. And I think with that, questions? That was the end. Any questions? No? Did I lose you with the C stuff, or does that sort of start to make a little bit of sense there?
So when will you throw this one away and start over again?
I figure I got about another 3 or 4 months before I'll throw it out. So, actually, so one of the things that I'm doing with this one is I'm being very slow about it, and I'm being very, I'm happily throwing away code on a regular basis. And what that usually is I create a bunch of abstractions that I think I need, and then I go to start use them, and I realize I don't actually need these, and so I throw them away. So again, I'm being aggressively minimalist about this. I showed this to Ricardo Cygnus, the current pumpkin at FOSDEM, and his comment was basically, well, I think you might actually be able to make this one work. Because he'd seen all the old ones, and he knew that the old ones were too complicated. We're hoping for a 5.24 experimental release. It will go up on CPAN first before that, though. But anybody wants to help? We'll fit it. Any more questions?
I guess when you declare superclass or subclass, using ISA instead of is, that's something that's historically
Yeah. So I tossed around a couple different things there. I was in the syntax layer. I was sort of opting for ISA and does because they map very clearly to what's actually being done in the background, and they make sense there. But then there's also an argument to use the extends and with that are from Moose, which I think were from an early version of some of the Perl 6 stuff. But then there's also the is with Perl 6. The only tricky part there is that Perl 6 makes less of a distinction between roles and classes, and so it's always is there, and the way
It's also does.
It's you can also use does.
Okay. You can does a role and you can is a class.
But can't you is a role as well?
Technically you can, but that's because then the role gets pumped into a class.
Okay, so that's something too that I'm actually trying to do in this. I'm trying to, Moose makes a big distinction between role and class. And all my previous prototypes make big distinction between role and class. This version doesn't. It's only a role if you say mop role new and the class name. At that point, you only get the methods available for roles. If you say mop class, arrow, you get the methods for class. So it's only what you choose to look, the lens with which you choose to look at it tells you whether it's a package, because you just want to look at it as a package, or whether it's a role, because you've decided that you initiated a role object, or a
In
class.
Perl 6 it works the same way. I mean,
Yeah, okay,
the
good,
mop
good.
for a role is different from a mop for a class. It's just that if you use a role name in an is, it will create a class for you with just that role in it.
Okay. So this one will do that. Instead, it'll just say, hey, you must have meant a class. So I'm going to treat it like a class. And accordingly, and that blows up in your face, as with Perl, you get both parts. Or all the scattered parts, whatever.